Imagine a king so wealthy that silver was as common as stones in his kingdom. A man whose wisdom attracted visitors from the ends of the earth. This is not the beginning of a fairy tale, but the true story of Solomon, the legendary king of Israel. His life, filled with glory and contradictions, continues to teach us valuable lessons today. Prepare yourself for a journey through time and discover how divine wisdom and human weaknesses shaped one of the most fascinating reigns in biblical history. In ancient Israel, amidst palace intrigues and power struggles, a young man emerged destined to become one of the most celebrated kings in history. Solomon, the son of King David and Bathsheba, was born in Jerusalem, at the heart of a growing kingdom. His Hebrew name, Shlomo, means peace, a foreshadowing of what his reign would bring. Although the Bible doesn't tell us much about Solomon's early years, we can imagine that his childhood was marked by the complexities of life in David's court. With multiple wives and many children, the royal palace was a scene of rivalries and ambitions. Solomon grew up observing political maneuvers and learning the nuances of power. The decisive moment in Solomon's life came when his father, David, aged and weakened, was nearing the end of his reign. The succession to the throne became an urgent and dangerous matter. Adonijah, Solomon's older half-brother, did not wait for an official decision. He proclaimed himself king, gaining the support of influential figures such as Joab, David's former general, and the priest Abiathar. The situation was critical. Israel's future hung by a thread. It was then that Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and the prophet Nathan acted swiftly and wisely. They reminded King David of his promise. Solomon would be his successor. Moved by this reminder and by divine will, David ordered that Solomon be anointed king. Imagine the scene, a young man, probably no older than 18, being led to Gin, where the priest Zadok anointed him with sacred oil. The sound of the shofar echoed through the city, announcing the new king. The people erupted in joy, shouting, "Long live King Solomon!" But the ascent to the throne was not the end of the story, only the beginning. Following his father's advice, Solomon had to act decisively to consolidate his reign. He ordered the execution of Adonijah and the exile of Abiathar, thus eliminating the most immediate threats to his government. These actions, though they may seem severe by modern standards, were considered necessary in the politics of the time to ensure the kingdom's stability. Thus began Solomon's reign, inheriting from his father David a vast territory of approximately 128,000 square kilometers. The young king was about to lead Israel into an era of unprecedented prosperity, but would also face challenges that would test his faith and wisdom. Solomon's reign, which would last about 40 years, from 970 to 931 before Christ, was just beginning. And with it, one of the most fascinating and instructive stories of the Old Testament would unfold, showing how divine blessing and human choices can shape a nation's destiny. The young Solomon, now firmly established on the throne of Israel, was about to lead his people into a golden age. But how could such a young king govern such a vast and complex nation? The answer came in an unexpected and divine form. One night, while he slept, Solomon had an extraordinary dream. In this dream, God appeared to him and made an incredible offer. "Ask what you want me to give you." Imagine the weight of this choice. Solomon could have asked for untold riches, a long life, or the defeat of all his enemies. But in a moment of deep humility and wisdom, he responded, "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong." This choice pleased God immensely. Not only did he grant Solomon unparalleled wisdom, but he also gave him what he did not ask for: wealth, honor, and a long life, provided he walked in the ways of the Lord. Solomon's wisdom soon became legendary. One of the most famous episodes that demonstrate his incredible ability to discern occurred early in his reign. Two women came to him, both claiming to be the mother of a baby. There were no witnesses, no concrete evidence. How would Solomon resolve this dilemma? His solution was as ingenious as it was shocking. He ordered that the baby be cut in half, with each woman receiving a portion. The true mother, horrified, immediately relinquished her claim, preferring to see her child alive with another woman than dead. Through this astute tactic, Solomon revealed the truth, and justice was served. This wise judgment was only the beginning. Solomon's fame for wisdom spread to all neighboring nations. The Bible tells us that he composed 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. His knowledge was vast and deep, encompassing everything from botany to zoology. He discoursed on trees, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls, and on animals, birds, reptiles, and fish. Solomon's wisdom attracted visitors from all corners of the known world. Kings and queens traveled great distances to hear his words of wisdom. The most famous of these visits was that of the Queen of Sheba. She came with a great retinue, bringing spices, gold, and precious stones. The queen tested Solomon with difficult questions and riddles, and was amazed to see that there was nothing the king could not answer. But Solomon's wisdom was not limited to words and judgments. He applied it in the administration of the kingdom, transforming Israel into a regional power. He divided the country into 12 administrative districts, each responsible for providing supplies for the royal court for 1 month of the year. This organization ensured a constant flow of resources and a more equitable distribution of responsibilities. The daily provisions for Solomon's court were impressive: 9,000 kilograms of flour, 30 oxen, along with sheep, deer, gazelles, and birds. Some may think these numbers are exaggerated, but we must remember that these meals fed not only the royal family but the entire court, including officials, officers, and their dependents, possibly more than 12,000 people daily. Under Solomon's wise leadership, Israel flourished as never before. Peace reigned, commerce prospered, and knowledge multiplied. The young king who asked God for wisdom was fulfilling his promise to lead his people with discernment and justice. However, as we will see, even the greatest wisdom can be tested by the temptations of power and wealth. Solomon's reign marked an era of unprecedented prosperity for Israel. Under his wise leadership, the kingdom expanded not only in territory but also in wealth and influence. Solomon transformed Israel into a center of international trade, establishing diplomatic and commercial relations with neighboring and distant nations. One of Solomon's most significant trade agreements was with Hiram, king of Tyre. This agreement was truly impressive. Annually, Solomon sent to Tyre the equivalent of 2,000 tons of wheat and 400,000 liters of pure olive oil. In exchange, he received precious woods, essential for his ambitious construction projects. Imagine the logistics required to transport such quantities of goods. But Solomon's trade was not limited to one direction. He established a lucrative trade in horses and chariots with Egypt, reselling them to the Hittites and Syrians at a considerable profit. He was a true entrepreneur of his time, always seeking new business opportunities. Perhaps Solomon's most audacious enterprise was his maritime trade. His fleets sailed the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea, reaching Ophir, a distant land, possibly in India or the eastern coast of Africa. These voyages could last up to 3 years, bringing back gold, exotic woods, precious stones, and rare animals. The wealth that flowed into Solomon's coffers was truly astonishing. The Bible tells us that silver became as common in Jerusalem as stones and cedar as abundant as sycamore fig trees in the plains. Solomon's annual income was estimated at 666 talents of gold, a staggering amount for the time. But what did Solomon do with all this wealth? He invested it in grand construction projects that transformed the face of Israel and left a lasting legacy. The most ambitious and significant project was, without a doubt, the construction of the temple in Jerusalem. This was the dream that his father, David, could not fulfill, and Solomon was determined to realize it. The temple would be the earthly dwelling place of God, the spiritual center of Israel. The construction of the temple began in the 4th year of Solomon's reign and took 7 years to complete. It was an impressive structure, built with the most precious materials, huge and carefully hewn stones, cedar wood from Lebanon, and pure gold covering the interior walls. The inner sanctuary, where the Ark of the Covenant would be placed, was completely lined with gold. To carry out this monumental work, Solomon recruited a massive workforce. He imposed forced labor on the subjugated Canaanite peoples and even recruited Israelites for the work, a measure that, although it accelerated the construction, would become a source of future resentment. When the temple was finally completed, Solomon organized a grand celebration. The Ark of the Covenant was brought in a solemn procession and placed in the Holy of Holies. Countless sacrifices were offered, and Solomon himself offered a prayer of dedication, asking God to dwell in that house and hear the prayers of his people. But the temple was not Solomon's only impressive construction. He also built for himself a magnificent palace, known as the House of the Forest of Lebanon, due to the amount of cedar wood used in its construction. This palace was an architectural marvel, 50 meters long, 25 meters wide, and 15 meters high. In addition, Solomon built a throne room where he held his judgments, a residence for Pharaoh's daughter, one of his wives, and fortresses at strategic points throughout the kingdom. He also rebuilt and fortified several cities, including Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, the latter received as a wedding dowry from the Pharaoh of Egypt. These constructions were not just demonstrations of wealth and power. They served practical purposes, strengthening the kingdom's defenses, improving infrastructure, and establishing Israel as a respected regional power. Solomon's reign represented the pinnacle of the Israelite monarchy. Under his leadership, the kingdom reached its greatest territorial extent and its peak of economic prosperity. Israel became a center of commerce, culture, and wisdom, respected and admired by neighboring nations. However, as we will see in the next section, all this glory and splendor also brought with them the seeds of future problems. Solomon's wisdom would be tested not only in the administration of his wealth, but also in the management of the consequences of his success. Despite all his wisdom and wealth, Solomon's reign was not without flaws. As his power and influence grew, so did the challenges and temptations he faced. This period of his life shows us how even the wisest of men can be vulnerable to the traps of power and prosperity. One of the first signs of trouble was the increasing tax burden imposed on the people of Israel. To maintain his luxurious lifestyle and fund his grand construction projects, Solomon needed an immense amount of resources. This resulted in increasingly heavy taxes for ordinary Israelites. The people who once celebrated his ascent to the throne began to feel the weight of sustaining the kingdom's glory. But perhaps the most controversial aspect of Solomon's reign was his personal life, particularly regarding his relationships. The Bible tells us that Solomon had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. This extraordinarily large harem was not just a matter of personal desire, but also a political strategy. Many of these marriages were alliances with foreign nations, a common practice among monarchs of the time to ensure peace and favor trade. However, this practice directly contradicted God's instructions, who had warned the Israelites not to marry women from other nations, as they might turn their hearts toward other gods. And this is precisely what happened to Solomon. Influenced by his foreign wives, Solomon began to tolerate and even participate in the worship of other gods. He built altars for Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. On the hill east of Jerusalem, he erected a high place for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. This was a tragic turn for the king who had built the Lord's temple and whose wisdom came directly from God. The man who once prayed so eloquently for God's presence now turned to idols. This apostasy not only offended God, but also sowed the seeds of religious division in Israel. The consequences of these actions were not long in coming. God appeared to Solomon and severely warned him. He declared that because of Solomon's unfaithfulness, the kingdom would be divided after his death. However, for David's sake, God would not take the entire kingdom from Solomon during his lifetime, but would divide it in the hands of his son. Moreover, God began to raise adversaries against Solomon. Hadad the Edomite and Rezin, son of Eliada, became constant threats to Israel's borders. Within the kingdom itself, Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, was prophesied to become the ruler of 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel after Solomon's death. The reign that began with such promise and glory was now facing serious challenges, both internal and external. The peace that had characterized much of Solomon's reign was giving way to increasing tensions. In his later years, Solomon seems to have reflected deeply on his life and choices. Many scholars believe that the book of Ecclesiastes, attributed to Solomon, was written during this period. In it, we find melancholic reflections on the vanity of life and the futility of seeking satisfaction only in material things. "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "all is vanity." These words, which open the book of Ecclesiastes, seem to capture Solomon's state of mind in his final years. The man who had everything, wisdom, wealth, power, came to the conclusion that without God, all of it was empty and meaningless. Solomon's story teaches us that even the greatest human wisdom is limited and fallible. It shows us that success and prosperity, if not managed with humility and obedience to God, can become dangerous traps. When Solomon died after reigning for 40 years, he left behind a complex legacy. On one hand, his reign represented the height of the Israelite monarchy in terms of power, wealth, and influence. On the other hand, his actions in the last years of his life sowed the seeds of the division and decline that would soon follow. Solomon's life reminds us that true wisdom is not just in knowledge or the ability to make intelligent decisions, but in the ability to remain faithful to God and His ways, even in the midst of prosperity and success. As we reflect on Solomon's life, we find a story rich in lessons that transcend time and culture. His reign, which lasted about 4 decades, left a lasting impact not only on Israel's history but also on world literature, philosophy, and spirituality. The most tangible legacy of Solomon was, undoubtedly, the Temple in Jerusalem. Although the physical building was destroyed centuries later, the concept of a central place of worship deeply shaped the Jewish faith and subsequently influenced other religions. Solomon's temple became a powerful symbol of devotion and of God's presence among His people. But perhaps Solomon's most enduring legacy is his contribution to wisdom literature. The books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs, traditionally attributed to him, continue to be studied and quoted today, offering insights into human nature, relationships, and the search for the meaning of life. Solomon's Proverbs, in particular, are a treasure trove of practical wisdom. They address themes ranging from work ethics to family relationships, offering advice that remains relevant in our modern society. Phrases like "the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," and "better is little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with turmoil" continue to resonate with readers of all ages. Solomon's story also teaches us valuable lessons about leadership and governance. His reign demonstrates how wise leadership can bring prosperity and peace to a nation. The way he organized his kingdom, established diplomatic relations, and fostered international trade serves as a model of effective administration. However, Solomon's decline in the latter years of his reign also offers important warnings. His story reminds us that no one, no matter how wise or powerful, is immune to the temptations and dangers of power. Solomon's fall into idolatry serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of compromising fundamental principles in the name of political convenience or personal pleasure. Furthermore, Solomon's reign makes us reflect on the true meaning of success and fulfillment. Despite all his wealth and wisdom, Solomon concluded that everything is vanity. This profound reflection invites us to consider what really matters in life and to seek a higher purpose than merely accumulating wealth or knowledge. Solomon's life also teaches us about the importance of balance. While his wisdom and wealth were gifts from God, the excessive or improper use of these gifts led to problems. This reminds us of the need to balance our ambitions and desires with obedience to ethical and spiritual principles. It is important to note that, although there are many legends and extra-biblical stories about Solomon, especially those that portray him as a magician or controller of demons, these narratives generally come from later sources and have no solid historical basis. The Solomon of the Bible is a human character, with greatness and flaws, whose story offers us deep lessons about the human condition. Archaeologically, although excavations in the temple area are limited for political and religious reasons, recent discoveries have shed light on the period of the Israelite monarchy. These findings continue to enrich our understanding of the historical context in which Solomon lived and reigned. As we conclude our journey through Solomon's life, we are reminded that true wisdom goes beyond intellectual knowledge. It involves living with integrity, humility, and in harmony with divine principles. Solomon's story invites us to seek not only material success, but a life of meaning and purpose. In a world that often values wealth and power above all else, Solomon's life challenges us to reconsider our priorities. It reminds us that true fulfillment comes not from accumulating goods or knowledge, but from a life lived in accordance with higher values and in service to others. May we, like Solomon in his best moments, seek divine wisdom and use it for the good of all those around us. And may we, unlike Solomon in his moments of weakness, remain faithful to these principles even when faced with temptations and challenges. Solomon's story, with all its glory and contradictions, continues to fascinate and teach us. May we learn from his victories and his mistakes, striving to live lives of wisdom, integrity, and purpose. We have reached the end of our journey through the extraordinary life of King Solomon. His story, full of wisdom, wealth, glory, and yes, even failures, continues to fascinate and teach us thousands of years later. We have seen how a young king, blessed with divine wisdom, led Israel to its peak of prosperity and influence. We have witnessed the construction of the magnificent temple, a lasting symbol of devotion. We have explored Solomon's proverbs and reflections, which still offer us deep insights into life. But we have also learned that even the wisest of men can make mistakes. Solomon's story reminds us that true wisdom lies not just in knowledge, but in living according to divine principles, maintaining humility and integrity. What lessons can we take from Solomon's life for our times? Perhaps it is the understanding that true success is not measured by wealth or power, but by the positive impact we have. Or the realization that wisdom must be constantly nurtured and applied, not taken for granted. Solomon's story invites us to reflect on our own lives. What kind of legacy are we building? How are we using our wisdom, our talents, knowledge, and resources to benefit others and honor God? Now, I want to invite you who have made it this far to do two things. First, share in the comments. What aspect of Solomon's life impacted you the most? Was it his pursuit of wisdom, his impressive achievements, or perhaps the lessons learned from his mistakes? Second, how about applying some of Solomon's wisdom to your life this week? Choose a proverb or teaching we discussed and put it into practice. Then, come back here and tell us how that experience was. And don't forget, our channel is full of other fascinating stories from the Bible, each with valuable lessons for our times. Choose one of the suggested videos on the screen to continue your journey of learning and spiritual growth. Until the next video, may God's wisdom guide your steps.